welcome again, everyone, to our OER Accessibility Workshop. One of the events is part of our pilot run of ALG Week. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nikita Afaha, and I'm going to start us off today with a little bit of introduction, and then I'll get you over to the second part of our team, and he will get his introduction in just a little bit. So Jeff, next slide. The first thing we're going to do is just talk about our purpose and objective here today. We've got a full agenda. It's in 1 hour, so we're going to take up every minute. Because what we're going to do here is build on kind of a national momentum that's happening right now around accessibility, compliance. There's really an urgent priority across education, higher education institutions as we prepare for updated ADA Title II digital accessibility requirements and updated or an upcoming WCAG aligned standards that are required to be done by or compliance by April 24th of this year. So coming up very soon. And so at the conclusion of this training, we want you guys to be able to apply some of these new standards, these accessibility principles, when creating or supporting your own OER and other course materials, as well as identify common accessibility barriers in digital learning content, and be able to implement efficient and effective fixes as well. We're going to give you some tools for that today. And also, we want you to be able to develop actionable strategies to support your inclusive learning environments and for institutional compliance efforts as well. So let's get your seatbelts rolling, and here we go. So our agenda today, I'm going to start off with a little bit about OER and ALG basics. Many of you may already be familiar, but we just got to kind of set the standard so we're all on the same page. And then I'm going to introduce our Director of Affordable Learning Georgia, Jeff, who will then go over the accessibility standards primer before he moves into a few compliance demos. I'll return to the agenda with some resources to share with you, and we will definitely have a Q&A session ready because you may have some questions about all of this and how it affects your day-to-day. All right, Jeff, next. So once again, I'm Nikita Afaha. I'm the Program Manager for Affordable Learning Georgia. You're going to meet Jeff in just a little bit. But I'm going to go over some OER and ALG basics for you. So let's go next, Jeff. So OER, what is that? Open Educational Resources. They are learning and teaching resource and research materials really in any format. It's not just digital materials, but any format, any medium that reside in the public domain or under copyright that have been released under an open license. And that open license permits no cost access, the ability to reuse, repurpose, to adapt and redistribute those resources by others. So when you hear the word open education, open educational resources, all of it is referring to its open license that has been a copyright that has been released for you to be able to use openly. Next. So why open access? Why is open a thing? Why is OER a thing? We got to lay that foundation before we get to what ALG is, as well as why accessibility is important as well. So open kind of counteracts an access barrier. There's a human cost to an access barrier of high textbook costs for students in our particular environment. The human cost may be something like this. I didn't buy groceries for 2 weeks, so I could buy $400 worth of textbooks. Or textbooks cost might just be the last expense that makes or breaks a student. These are quotes actually from students and faculty within the University System of Georgia. We have some reference lists later on. You can see where this information came from. And that kind of works into a behavioral shift. So there was a survey that was done by the Florida Virtual Campus, and what they found is that over 50% or over half of all students that will not acquire their textbooks because of the cost. And it has an academic fallout. And that can lead to 40% avoiding registering for a course based on the cost, 25% dropping a course based on the cost, or 33% earning a lower grade because of access barriers related to cost or day one access that the cost can sometimes cause. Next. So there's the barrier. So what is this engine of affordability? That is through open educational resources. And open educational resources, the open world has kind of a life cycle. It starts out first with expert teams like you creating resources. And in that loop, more faculty will then begin to adopt those resources and share those resources openly. And then new teams that get those resources can revise them and remix them and use them in their context. And it just keeps going. And what happens with that is that we find these resources are at zero cost to the students while this is happening. They have access to free textbooks to use and free textbooks to retain. So if they have these information that they may need later on in their career, they can still refer to it and take a look. This helps also with the openness, helps with no subscription costs, accounts that we typically get with paid resources, as well as open licensing, allowing for you to customize things to be hyper relevant. You can customize for what's happening in current events, as we know, which moves fast, or technology. It moves all very fast, and so open helps us to adjust to that. All right, next. So enter ALG, Affordable Learning Georgia. In 2013, we got started as a pilot program through Galileo, and we continue now as an official initiative of the University System of Georgia that supports the university system's goals and strategic plan through our own personal mission and vision, which includes promoting student success and levels the playing field for all students through the support and adoption, adaptation, and creation of affordable and open educational resources by who? You, USG faculty and professional staff. Our vision, of course, is affordable, accessible, high quality educational resources for every student in every course. Next. So how does ALG do that? We have some mechanisms of change. We offer and support, Jeff and I, grants. And so we have 3 different types. ALG offers transformation grants, continuous improvement grants, and research grants. Today's session is not specifically about each of these grants, but we can answer any questions you might have afterwards and provide you some resources more about what these grants are about. Next. So what is the impact of what ALG does? We offer the grants, we give out information, and we're hoping to impact students. And how does that happen? As of spring 2026, you'll see on our website, and here's a graphic for you, that we have affected over $208 million. We're really proud of that in total student savings that have been generated since we were officially a department in 2014. That is 1.6 million students impacted by affordable materials. And those affordable materials came through 700 grant-funded projects across the university system. And every university system institution, all 25, what number are we at now? 25, 26, 25?
We're at 25 now.
25. All institutions have been represented. So we're really proud of being able to impact students across the university system of Georgia. So that's kind of a primer about ALG. Next, Jeff. Now we can get into what this session is about, and I will turn it over for Jeff to introduce himself.
Hi, so I'm Jeff Gallant. I'm the Program Director of Affordable Learning Georgia. Over the past couple of years, we've gone from just training about accessibility to really checking for accessibility whenever we're sharing out our materials. Part of that has to do with a requirement, but part of that has to do with just an ethical responsibility. So the ADA rule on this from the Department of Justice is that by April 26th of this year, all content that's available on the web needs to be made compliant with the WCAG 2.1 level AA guidelines. That means the kind of middle level of accessibility in between level A, which is like, well, technically you could possibly use this if you have a disability, but it's not very accessible. Level AAA means everything should be this accessible, but it requires a lot of experts and many hours of work. And a little bit more about this. So when folks talk about accessibility, we often talk about compliance. We talk about the way that we're following various laws because nobody wants to go to court. But there's a big reason why the ADA exists in the first place. It is to ensure that folks with disabilities in the United States are able to access what they need to access, that they're not, as a result, not discriminated against. And in education, one of the big things that we do, and one of the things that we do when we create educational resources is we are transmitting information from, looking at the old information science model, the information model of transmission from the sender to the receiver. And then knowledge processing happens past that point. If you are transmitting information in a way that receivers of that information cannot receive the message. So if you're, for example, using an image to convey information, but folks can't hear that image and they can't see, they do not have the same access to the information you're providing that other students do. So it's not just a set of arbitrary standards that says, okay, well, it's accessible to somebody and I don't quite know about this, but at some point it'll work with something and whatever. It really is about making sure that as public workers of any kind and as educators, that we do not discriminate against the folks who are taking our courses and applying for college. All of that stuff is a part of this rule. I see from Dr. Joshi Beck saying that we will be sharing these PowerPoint slides. In fact, they'll be a little bit more updated than this. I told Nikita, I have this other slide, and then I loaded the slides that I thought I fixed, and I didn't. So yeah, so there'll be even more about this that I just talked about on there. So you might think that there are some exceptions to this rule that would apply to educational resources, but they really don't. And it's because of how they're used. So web content that has existed for a while and you want that stuff to be out there because it's there for your history. Like, hey, this is a 1992 GeoCities page. I ran a fan site for some old video game, and hey, it's not accessible to everybody, but it's just sitting out there if you want to see it. If you want to make it better, go ahead. That's the kind of thing you would call archived web content. If you're going to say that something's archived, it needs to be in a special area. But really what you're saying is this should not be used in any kinds of activities that would be required of anybody in your organization providing services to anyone as a public organization and as a citizen receiving those. So GeoCities does not exist anymore, but NeoCities free does it. Yeah, you could check that out sometime. Pre-existing conventional documents, you would think that applies to OER pretty well because, hey, Word documents, PDFs, that's the old stuff that we've always shared as files. Okay, we can host a pre-existing conventional document and have it there for historical use, but we cannot have it there to require anybody to use it in a course. So any pre-existing conventional documents that are not accessible under this rule should not be used in any of your courses. So we would hate to share any educational resources that we then say don't use these as educational resources. That wouldn't make much sense. There are some pre-existing documents that are going to be very hard to make accessible, and we will be marking those as such, but we want to make sure in the meantime that folks do not use those as part of an activity that would be required in a course. There are some other exceptions out there. Those are more software oriented things, stuff that's behind a password wall, documentation by third-party vendors. That's not stuff that you're going to have to worry about in creating any kind of OER. So the major guidelines in WCAG that we have to worry about as OER creators, and this is different from what you'll see if you go to the WCAG guidelines, because the WCAG guidelines are for web developers. They were made by web developers. They were made by the W3 consortium all the way back when they first really started to standardize the web. Folks like the person who created the hypertext protocol were in on this project. And so WCAG is part of it, and they are focused on websites. But they do have some guidelines for documents in there. And those are the kinds of things that we need to worry about, especially when we're distributing OER. So if you are writing an open resource, you want to keep these in mind from the beginning. Retrofitting this stuff later is much harder to do than it is to build things accessible from the beginning. You want to focus on the chapter 1 stuff. Yes, exactly. Bake in accessibility. Thank you, Doria. Yeah, so text alternatives are any time that you have some sort of audiovisual content that someone with a disability would not be able to perceive, you need to have a text alternative. Now, why is text any different from images if you can see images and you can see text and you read images and you read text? The difference is that systems can read text and they can create it, they can make it into sounds by text to speech. So we're really focusing on screen readers when we're looking at OER. There are other things that we focus on, but screen readers are a big part of this. Also, stuff like reading the screen with color contrast for colorblind access, that stuff is also very important. But think about screen readers when you think about text alternatives to media that you are sharing. So that includes alt text, and I'll show you a little bit of that as we go through. It also needs to be adaptable. So if you've got a big long textbook and you've got 15 different chapters. One way that you could make this stuff easier to navigate back when you only printed out books is you could put like a little indentation in the side so you could just go to the next thing. You've seen like a huge dictionary. You got the A, B, C, D, E, and you'd flip that page over to that. If you're really young, I feel very old, and you may not have even seen this before. But what you would do is you would flip to that. Screen readers, if you just had a big, long, open textbook with no indication to a screen reader where a chapter started, then the only way that you could read that book is from page 1 all the way down to page 500. If you have a structure that allows screen readers to go, okay, here's chapter 1, here's chapter 2, here's chapter 3, you can jump to that chapter. You can jump to a sub chapter if you structure it right. And then you can get to what you need to, as opposed to having to go through the entire thing. Yeah. Oh, okay. Dr. Beck says, will current OER textbooks we are using be updated? Interesting and very good question. I do actually want to address a bit of that right now. So ALG does share open educational resources. We share the ones that were created from our grant program that Nikita very well described early on. And those are OER. Those are the ones that we are checking for accessibility. As of 2025, we have a set plan where we read accessibility criteria. We cannot publish something if we think that it is not accessible. Before that, folks were trained in accessibility. They often built accessible things. Some of those did not. Yep, a thumb index. Right, exactly. Thanks, Dr. DeRocher, about that one. But yeah, so when we're sharing our stuff, that's current OER. That is some of the textbooks that are out there, but that's not all of them. The open community is global. Folks will share things in a repository in Germany, and people will be using it across the world, and that's amazing. But also, we don't control that open textbook. So if you've adopted a resource that is not something that we've published, we're not checking that for accessibility because that is their resource. It is on them to keep their stuff accessible if it's hosted outside of our stuff. Now, hopefully, if you've got a very big open publisher, something like OpenStax, they've planned on accessibility for a very long time, and your stuff is probably already accessible, and they will do even more to that in the future. You would hope that anybody in the United States who is running an OER program is only going to be publishing accessible things from here on in. But the onus of who does the accessibility fixes is often on the creator. Now, also, because things are open, we can use that resource to say, I'm going to remake this as an accessible thing. I have every right to do so and redistribute it because it's an openly licensed book. You could totally do that. That is some work. We can't just take every open textbook out there and do all the work to make it accessible and share all of them. That would just not be feasible for me and Nikita, and that's it, right? Yeah, and Dr. Hardy says Europe has a stricter standard. Theirs was already WCAG 2.2. Yeah, and what we'll say moving forward in ALG is compliance with the ADA Title II standard. That will change based on what they're using. Right now it's WCAG 2.1. Later on it's different. Oh, we got a question from Adriana. If I transcribe the information from an OR into an accessible PowerPoint, can I use the non-accessible textbook together with the corresponding accessible PowerPoints? Okay, I'm not sure what an, okay, you're saying OER. Okay, so if you have an open textbook that you are requiring folks to use at all, then that needs to be accessible in your course. If you have accessible PowerPoints that you have made from a previously existing OER, but you are not using that OER in the class, you're saying it's out there, but we're not using it here. You are using these PowerPoints. That's fine. You have an accessible set of resources. You are only using accessible materials. If you are using inaccessible materials, they have to be made accessible somehow. You wouldn't want things to be very different from each other and say, well, you've got this alternative thing. It's not the same. It's not comprehensive. It's a set of lecture slides, but it's something. You have to have the same thing be accessible for sure. Okay. Yeah. So if you're just using the PowerPoint and you're just requiring the PowerPoint, then that's fine. If you are also requiring the book and activities in the book, reading the book, stuff like that, then that book needs to be accessible. Yep. Very cool. I'm glad that questions are coming in. Even if I have to go through slides faster, the slides are secondary. I really love that folks are asking questions. That's the primary thing. So the part 2 of it, there is a thing that says distinguishable too. So this is the part that is not really about screen readers. This is about being able to see things when you have sight issues, but you can't, but you aren't necessarily completely unsighted. So for example, if you were going to use color to convey any type of information, and this has happened very recently in the resources that we've seen out of our grantees, you have to include an alternative way to denote that same thing. So very recently, we had a set of homework problems that instructors could use. And they said the examples that students created, they are in dark red. And the examples that we created, they are in black. You can't really do that. You have to find a different way to do it. So you might say students, colon, this. You could even underline things, but that's not quite as well. But definitely make sure that you are using text to convey information whenever possible. If you use color to convey information as well to help folks out who want it, you can do that. Like on my Excel sheets, there's so much stuff, and I often will color code things for me so that I can tell, okay, what's the difference between this and this at a quick visual glance. But they are always different in the text that's in that box. And if you had a reader of any sort, you could tell it the same way. Yep, and Doria Hardy shows who can use, because yep, the color blindness is not just one thing. Folks have many different types of it. And even if you have like 5 different modes for 5 different kinds of color blindness, you'll be the one that goes in there and says, none of these 5 work for me. Contrast, another one. Right here, we've got a black background on a white text. That's all to do with color. It's color contrast between background and text. That needs to be sure that you meet these specifications, which are a luminance ratio of 4.5 to 1. That is often a visual check because computer programs aren't great at checking them, but sometimes it works. Also, you should be able to resize the text. Programs can do that. Most of the time, you should be able to resize the text using a word processor program, a screen reading program that does like a, like an EPUB, like a Kindle reader, you can magnify the text. That's more of a software thing. But if you've made it in a way where you can't resize the text, then you've got a perceivable issue. So if you have a PDF where a lot of stuff is images and then you zoom in and it's blurry because it's all images, that will be a problem. Using images of text. So folks on Twitter loved to do this about 10 years ago. They would take a quote, and instead of just putting it in quotation marks and saying who it was from, they took a very stylish looking quote image and put it on there. And it'd have the picture of somebody or something like that. That's great until you put it into a PowerPoint and a screen reader just shows it as image, and that's it. Use text as text. Don't use images as text if at all possible. If you have something where you have to be like, hey, this is an example of a newspaper passage and it has this formatting, that's great. There's other ways to do it to have a text alternative there. Now, the other chapters of WCAG, and there is more than just that one that we were talking about for a while there, they don't have so much to do with OER unless your OER is something that's more advanced or web-based. So the second one is whether or not something is operable. So can you only use a keyboard and navigate everything? Can you only use a mouse and navigate everything? If you think of devices that folks use when they can't use their hands, but they can only use their mouth to navigate, or they can only use voice to navigate, that's that kind of thing. That's tech stuff that you need to know about. There's also whether or not something is understandable, making sure that machine readers can actually understand what it is. Part of that is sometimes when you make a textbook, you can indicate what language it's in, and you can say, this is in English. This helps screen readers. That's kind of part of chapter 3, but it's a little thing. 4 is whether or not the user interface is robust. That's not really something that we're looking at if we're just making an open textbook in an application that somebody else made. But the people who make those applications, and if you're requiring your students to use any kind of software, that stuff applies to it. And hopefully the software creators have some sort of documentation of how they've made their stuff accessible. Whether or not it conforms is the last one, and how conformance works and how you put in a complaint. It's administrative stuff. If you're adopting web content that's out there, if you're directing folks to a news site, that news site has to be accessible because you are sending your students to it, and you are therefore requiring them to understand that information. So then in that case, that stuff needs to be accessible. And often the only people who can make it accessible are the folks who create it and publish it. So it does get a bit complicated when you are linking folks out to stuff, for sure. So how do we check for accessibility for our OER? Just as kind of a running example of how you can start looking at your own open resources and think about it. When we get Word and PDF and PowerPoint documents, which are a lot of the OER that we receive, we check in 4 big categories, and they've got their own column in our review where we are putting yes, no, or etc. in there with some notes. The first one is alternative text or captions. So if you have images, those images either have alt text within the image or they have captions after them. You usually don't want both, because if you do have both, the alt text and the captions, if they are the same thing, you're going to get this duplication read out on screen as it goes along. First, you're going to say what the image is. Then you have this text that tells you what the image is. Have one or the other, and that should be okay. Structured text, so that's making sure that if you've got chapters, they're not just in bold and they look like a chapter. They are assigned a particular heading 1, 2, 3, 4, that kind of thing in a hierarchy. Color contrast, so yes, accessibility checkers can check for color contrast sometimes. On the web, it's pretty easy. In Word documents, sometimes. In PowerPoint, sometimes. On images in a Word document, it's up to you. So you will have to make sure to check this stuff manually. It will be somewhat subjective as a result, but just make sure that your contrast is good enough that you, from a distance, you can see what the background is and what the text is. Reading order is super important for PowerPoint. This right here, it uses a layout, and then I just told PowerPoint to design that layout in a certain way. And because I put all of this text in two different containers, it knows what those containers are, and it will read them in the right order. It's not reading the bullet point list and then the title. Yeah, so PowerPoint might read it in the order that you place it on the slide if you don't follow the layouts. The layouts tell PowerPoint what order things are in. If it's not, and you put a photo up here and you put some alt text and you describe it, and then you've got text over here, you got text over here, you got text over here, it'll just list them in the order that you posted them in, and that's it. And it may not be the order that you want, and it will be unequal for the students who are using a screen reader in that case. The best way to check this is to go to PowerPoint and go to View Outline. The outline should be telling you what goes in what order. Yeah, but PDFs, that's very difficult with reading order. A lot of things get translated to PDF from other creators, and when they do, they get all kinds of weird text blocks thrown in. Sometimes this every word is a new object. Sometimes the chapters are seen in a completely different margin and therefore are read at the end. And so you read all of this and then you read all the chapters. It can be a nightmare. So be sure that you are structuring your stuff before you get it moved over to PDF, and that you check the reading order afterwards, because fixing that is that's the nightmare scenario. Now, there are plenty of other things that we can check if they arise. They aren't always in OER, but they can be, like spreadsheets, music notation, videos need a caption or a transcript or both. Audio resources. So if you have a podcast and you're requiring your students to listen to that podcast, it needs to have a text alternative, because folks who can't hear would not be able to participate in that case. Raw code. Now, this is an interesting one. If you provide code to teach people how to code and they can read the code, that's fine. If you're coding it so that when you run it, it's a program, the program needs to be accessible. Now, we cannot check whether or not your Python code is running an accessible program. We're not computer scientists over here. But if you are providing code, be sure that you at least provide the raw code files so that somebody who was running it, they could possibly make it accessible down the line. Non-English language text can be difficult. Reading specifically text from Middle Eastern countries in different Arabian language fonts, that can be very difficult because it is reading in a different direction. It needs to be recognized as that language whenever you're publishing it. If it's not recognized as that language, then the screen reader is going to try to read it left to right and be very confused. The same thing can happen. It happens a lot with languages that are based in Sanskrit as well. So those need to be indicated that this is this particular language and it's readable. So there's more about this that we have. These two documents that we have are in kind of a draft mode until the deadline, because we are kind of building on them as living documents for a while. But one of them is our accessibility statement. And the other one is a document that answers the question, well, how did you do that? What are the finer details of how you did that thing? So our accessibility statement pertains particularly to OER. The USG has their own accessibility policy and statement and things like that. Galileo does as well. Those apply to ALG. But for OER, which is something that we only do, we have our own statement for that and how we do our checks. Now, more details on exactly what we do and how to do it, that's in our standard operating procedures guide. Both of these are not quite at 1.0 yet, but they will be by that deadline. So if you have any questions about it, or you need to run something in your own department, you run an OER program at your institution, these are CC by 4.0. You can borrow them, you can revise, remix as you see fit. So I want to share just a little bit about how this looks before I transfer this over to Nikita. Just a couple of quick ways to look at checking for accessibility. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to share the first window here. And this way, uh, I'm going to show you a little bit of what our stuff looked like in fall 2025 when we received our grants, our final reports. So here's one Word document. This one was done in modules. So they did one per chapter, basically. You could make this into a whole textbook, but they did it in a way that is very easily put into a learning management system. This is Python code stuff. Now, I can't check exactly whether or not your Python code when it runs is accessible. But what I can do is I could check for accessibility. So I go to File, I go to Info, I go to Check for Issues, I go to Check for Accessibility. This is too many clicks to get to an accessibility checker. I don't like it. You could put an accessibility tab on the ribbon if you feel like it, but that's not by default. So I wanted to show you how to get here. When this runs, it checks for some things. Color and contrast. So if it knows what the background is and it knows what the text is, it will check the color and contrast here and tell you where something is hard to read. Any photos that are missing alt text would be right here. If there are tables, it'll tell you if it's missing a header. That's super important. Tables are structured in a way that every column is a dimension. It tells you an aspect of the thing that's in the row. The row is the fact or the item that's being discussed. So in our grants, for example, a row would be a grant project. And in that big table of all our grant projects, the amount that this is saving students per year is 30,000. So the annual savings column says 30,000 in that row. The only way that a screen reader or that even I know that that's an annual savings number is because we have a header at the beginning of the entire thing that says annual savings. If it wasn't there, if screen readers didn't know it was there, then it would be completely missing. So tables are super important. Document structure, so if there were no headings in the document, it would let you know right here. If anything's password protected, it would tell you here, but that's not the case. So this is good. It says, looks good, no issues found. This person even made a table of contents out of all of the structured headings that they use. And I can go to View, Navigation pane, and here it is. So you've got the for loops. We've got each of the subsections in here. I can navigate this very well. And a screen reader can navigate it the same way, which is very cool. Now, here is another one in the same exact chapter. I've run an accessibility check on it. And one thing it says is hard to read text contrast. I say, okay, well, what is that? So this text right here is a little bit too bright to be on this white background. And it's telling you, well, you could make it this color and it would be accessible, or this color would be accessible. You could try one of those and that should work. What I'm gonna do instead is I know that this is a heading, right? So I'm gonna put this here. If I go down to the next heading, it's going to have that same bad color. And I don't want that to happen. So here's 6.1 and here's 6.2, right? I would have to go and make all of these black. But instead what I'm going to do is make 6.1 black. I know it's a heading 2 because it's outlined. I'm going to right click it and go update heading 2 to match selection. Now all of my heading 2s no longer have that contrast issue. So what else have we got here? Okay, so this is a heading 3 of some sort, or even it's formatted normal. Well, I'm going to make that a heading 3. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to make that a heading 3 as well. And now we're good. You also could maybe in there look and see like, oh, this is actually structural, and I'm going to have to find out how that's numbered. That will be something I'll have to check on that tech. Now here's the PowerPoint I've been using. Infographics are super difficult as images to convey to people in alt text. If I'm up here and I see Nikita's photo and I click on this and I want to know what it is, it will say a photo of the ALG program manager, Nikita Faha, wearing glasses and white jacket. Great. That's all you need to know. You don't need to say, what color her earrings are, how many wristbands there are. You got the point across. Here, getting the point across is a lot. And so the alt text is going to be a lot different. So if I go view alt text here, first of all, it says it's an infographic. Then it tells you the title. Then it shows a cyclical process where a team of experts create an open resource. So everything that Nikita explained has to go into the alt text if you make an infographic like this. It's a big difference between this and say something like this, which would just be like a magnifying glass, although this is technically an infographic and it has a lot of alt text to it. Yeah, exactly. There we go. Yeah, so alt text looks different depending on what the information is you're trying to transmit. Over here, there is a background image. You can see that there's a keyboard in the background. If I look at the alt text for that keyboard image, it's marked as decorative because if I were using a screen reader to get the information from this PowerPoint, the screen reader doesn't need to tell me that there is a keyboard somewhere in here. There's no reason for it. It's just a decorative background thing. So if you mark it as decorative, then you're all set. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This will probably make me switch back over to the PowerPoint again. Yep, here we go. Let's get over that inertia and go back into the PowerPoint itself. Aha, yep, it should be under the review tab on the ribbon as well. Aha, very good. And so now I am going all the way back where we were. There we go. All right, I'm going to move this back to Nikita to talk about what you can do next.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much. Honestly, if I could just reiterate some of the things you were saying, as much trouble as it took Jeff to get us back to the original slide, with all of the navigation that we have available, imagine what it must be like for a student that is using other tools that, like a screen reader to now get back to the place where they were trying to read before they got interrupted by a phone call or something like that. So you can imagine why all of these structures and things like that are so very important to make sure all of our students get an equal opportunity at the high quality education that we're offering. And as I think about it, I put in the infographics because they are so good looking, right, for the PowerPoint slides. And in a situation like this, the infographics really convey a good picture. But without the alt text, some students are not going to get the same experience. And you may have to think about how important the infographic is. And maybe it's more important in an instructional context to just use text. So it just depends. And so if you're also using, we tell this a lot to our OER writers, when you are, producing something like a lab kit or lab results, and it has a picture or a graphic that's difficult to describe, but it's necessary for instruction. Your alt text needs to be instructional more than just descriptive. So it's very important that we provide high quality to all of our students. And so now we've come all the way through this. We have a moment or two for questions, but I want to just go through a couple of resources. Jeff mentioned some of them as well. Thank you, Jeff. So how are you going to build your compliance strategy? Because we do have a deadline for WCAG compliance. I forgot the date again, Jeff. It's April 25th, 6th?
26th.
26th. So we need to be really thinking about this as well. So how to build your own compliance strategy. One, you can start with your local campus experts. A lot of the campuses have centers for teaching and learning where you will have accessibility, focused people there, instructional designers, things like that, who are used to dealing with making decisions about what is good, accessible document. Librarians might be able to help you as well. Instructional designers, again, accessibility offices. Use your local campus experts. It's a team effort. And so definitely don't try to take it on by yourself if you have a bigger project to work on. In addition to that, you can use our Affordable Learning Georgia's OER accessibility guides as the next practical steps. Jeff put in a link for that, as he did again, where we have a series of workshops and other demonstrations in much more detail, and you'll be able to get some more details and guidance through that training as well. And of course, start from the beginning, bake in accessibility, as that was said earlier by Dr. Hardy. Integrate MS Office and Adobe accessibility checkers in your daily practice. when I got ready to put this presentation out, I thought, oh, wait, I got to do an accessibility check because we're going to share this out for people to use all over the USG, openly licensed, so that it needs to be accessible. And so when I came across all of my wonderful infographics that I use Notebook LM to create, I was so proud of them, and I realized no one's going to be able to know what it's talking about unless I put in appropriate instructional, not just descriptive, alt text. And sometimes alt text that's that long, you may just want to use text on the slide instead of putting all of that alt text in there. But we're on a time crunch, so we got this done. And then finally, stay connected. There's a lot going on in the open space regarding accessibility, OER usage, textbook costs. That's the big culture of accessibility and affordability that you might want to be a part of. So stay connected. You can start by joining the ALG newsletter. There's open educational organizations and associations. And of course, every USG institution has a set of local ALG campus champions. And on the next slide, I'll show you. You can go to the next slide, Jeff. We have a link for, oh, not quite. It's coming. It's coming. It's on the slide soon, but we'll stay here for a moment. There's a link for how you can find out who your local champion is. And champions are a network across the USG that include, we have faculty champions, librarian champions, as well as instructional design champions for Affordable Learning Georgia that can have kind of a base knowledge of all the things we're talking about here today. So here are your compliance resources. You're going to need to go through the WCAG guidelines. There's a link there for that. And then, of course, our ALG accessibility guides and things like that that we've put in the chat for you, as well as linked here. Next. And we want you to stay connected. Those are the stay connected resources I wanted to share with you. These are links, and we will share the slides out so that you will have access to all of them. This is an accessibility guideline as well, that when you're putting in links, that they should be readable text rather than HTML URLs, right? So we have the links here for you to our newsletter to sign in, as well as some associations and how to find your local champion. And so that's about it. Next, we want to go to questions. And also we have a feedback survey. I'm going to drop that in the chat as well before you leave. And while we're doing questions, if you wouldn't mind joining me in the feedback with our forums, we'd appreciate that. But right now I'm going to open up the floor for questions if you want to drop them into chat. We would love to take questions before we close out. We've got quite a few minutes for that. And if you raise your hand, I can also unmute you and allow you to speak if you'd rather do that rather than chatting in the typing it in the chat. So we'll just pause here for questions.
Oh, I think this form of event in Microsoft Teams is stopping people from being able to unmute themselves.
Okay, so yeah, they would have to raise their hand, not have to unmute them. Yeah. Because I think it was set up at the beginning to make sure that the muting would be doing that.
Yeah.
So definitely anyone to raise your hand or just drop in the chat as well. And I think the Q&A is open. The question and answer feature of this Teams meeting. Yeah, we got through on time there. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Ravi. Great to see you. And yeah, folks had been asking in the middle too, so that makes sense.
Helps. It does help indeed.
We're kind of in the adjourning phase.
And anything while we're waiting, just in case there are any questions being thought of, Jeff, do you have any other additional things as you were going through your slides and think, oh, I should have mentioned this, I should have mentioned that?
Well, so what we're talking about today has a lot to do with complying with the guidelines that are about to come into effect. You can go beyond that, and there are many reasons why you would want to. There are like teaching and learning reasons why you would want to go even further in making your stuff not just accessible, but designed universally for everyone. The UDL guidelines, which are done by CAST, which is kind of an American, I think it's an American organization. They usually function within the United States. their guidelines for universal design for learning are ones that go beyond your basic compliance for accessibility. It's there. Multiple means of perception is a huge part of that. But they also get into different ways that folks should be able to express their ideas, different ways that you should be able to make people happy using your activities. Like nurturing joy and play is part of UDL. Like UDL is like accessibility plus plus plus. It's really cool to look at this stuff and see how far you can go with it. We've had some questions come into ALG of like, hey, why isn't this in an audiobook format? It's not accessible to me because I only listen to books in an audiobook format. For us, that's not currently within our capabilities. We can't be narrating every textbook that we come across, but it is a cool idea. I feel like if you can make an audiobook version of your text, one that conveys the information in the way that you really wanted it to come across, as opposed to just having a screen reader trip over itself trying to read it forever, then you can make something more engaging that way. Folks who are driving a car aren't necessarily what you would consider disabled, but folks who are driving a car could possibly listen to your audiobook version of your text, but they couldn't be reading it as they're driving. So not only does accessibility have to do with making sure that you're not discriminating for folks with disabilities, but it often just makes things better in general the more accessible that you make something. The more options, the better for sure.
That's a really good point, Jeff. That touches my heart because we have a lot of students as we look at the population of University System of Georgia students. There's a large population of adult learners who are returning back to school, and there are a large population of traditional age students who have adult responsibilities, such as caregiving responsibilities. And as you think about that caregiver who is put all the children to sleep, for the night and wants to watch the video that is now for their college class, but they can't have the volume on. So captions is not just an accessibility issue here. It's accessibility plus, which is kind of what universal design for learning is about. And there's another adage that you may have heard, I'm sure, called it takes a village. It really does take a village for quality education. So don't think that you have to do these things alone. You have the expertise as faculty members, but engage the village of your campus expertise in accessibility, as well as instructional designers, to incorporate all of the functions and pedagogy that is helpful, not only just to specific populations, but makes the quality of your product for success much wider than that. So any other questions, comments? Any comments? We can open that up as well. We can do comments if you want to do comments, or just raise your hand. I can unmute you. We have one there from Dr. Hardy. Okay, we've got a question. Okay, so.
Okay, is a video including captions and a video having human generated captions the same thing for practical purposes? So there are kind of two answers to this. One is if you were to do a technical scan of every video that you've published, and you have automatically generated captions on YouTube for one of them, and you've got the captions that you have gone over and edited on your end on another one, that scan might show it as both of these are compliant. But the one that you made discriminates less because you are giving folks exactly what you wanted to convey in text as what's on this video. Whenever I'm doing videos like this and there's transcripts, when I say OER, half of the time I get OR, sometimes I get O, we are, like that part of the sentence. And if that's the only way I'm going to be able to see what somebody said, that's going to be really difficult to, you're starting to do two different kinds of processing at that point. If you really want folks to learn something at the same time that they're trying to think, oh, that's what YouTube probably thinks he said, that would be unequal as opposed to someone who could just hear the video. So even though you might have technical compliance using auto-generated captions, you really want to keep it as close to what you want to convey in the video um, when you're editing those captions and putting them out there. That's what I tend to do. I tend to let YouTube and Microsoft over here, because they're going to transcribe it, transcribe the whole thing. And then I go through, and then every single time that Nikita's name comes up, I change it from the Russian spelling to NA. And then I'm like, okay, we fixed that part. Now let's keep going and make sure that there isn't anything else weird in here. I know at one point everybody was worried that, oh, it's going to interpret something I say as a swear word, and then it's going to, be inappropriate and stuff. But really, the most important thing is that the captions convey what you want to convey in a video. So yeah, it's kind of a two-pronged question there, Dr. Luque, but yeah, it's a little of both there.
Indeed.
Oh, Dr. Primo Vincent, I teach online. Is it okay to include this below in the content of each module? First, click on page 4 of book 1, then listen to and repeat all the 1.2 numbers in Spanish until you feel reproducing and recognize the sound of all the numbers. It is very important to listen to the audio resources. Yeah, students with visual impairments may access accessible PowerPoint presentations by clicking the number. PowerPoint includes the same content as the textbook. Okay, so it looks like your text is linking folks or embedding in audio content. And if you have the text version of that audio content, if you're linking over to that, that's good. That's the text alternative to the audio content. So that should be okay so long as the PowerPoints are providing a text alternative to the audio content that is on that page. Now, if, let's say, I only was able to use the PowerPoints and I couldn't use the audio content, and a test came up and I couldn't pass it because something was on the audio content that wasn't on the PowerPoint content, that would be unequal for sure. So yeah, and if the audio is using YouTube and it's got even automatic captions, you're halfway there. If you're creating the stuff, you can make it even better. That's for sure. But yeah, if you have more questions about this in particular, send over an email. We can go over details and stuff a little bit better over email.
And that's exactly about what I was going to end the Q&A session on, is the fact that you can see some of the situations can get a little bit layered. And so we want to make sure that you're engaging all the experts you have at your disposal, not only on your campus, but Jeff and I are a resource as well. We are not lawyers and we are not compliance officers, but we do have some knowledge and we can help to point you in the right directions. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Please do share the word. Please do get compliant by the deadline and support your institution as well as the USG in doing that. And we appreciate you. Our contact information is here and we look forward to seeing you soon. Hopefully you'll join us on our Friday session as we close out ALG Week, the pilot run 2026. Thank you guys. Bye.
Thanks so much.